Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 6, The Sorcery of Asia from the Phoenix by Manly P. Hall. The Sorcery of Asia. Strange stories issue from the inscrutable East, stories telling of magic and sorcery and the extraordinary powers which a man may develop by rigid mental and physical discipline. Of course, such tales are ridiculed by the worldly wise or branded as infernal by the theologically minded. The rumors persist, however, and with the evidence piling up, cause the unpleasant realization that there are stranger things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in our philosophy. There is scarcely a community in Asia which does not boast of at least one fakir or wonder worker who occasionally exhibits his magic and who is suspected by the townsfolk of possessing powers little inferior to those of a god. This magician of indeterminable age and unkempt appearance dwells on the outskirts of the village, his person an oracle, and his presence a benediction. The children of Asia grow up in the presence of these holy men. They understand the psychology of these recluses and the motives which turn them from the world of ordinary men to become adepts in unseen forces. Thus, the growing child not only comes to believe in magic, but through the evidence of his senses and the whole background of an ancestral lore, he knows magic to be true. Notwithstanding the vehemence of Occidental unbelief, the Oriental has learned to know and is content in the realization that, as Paracelsus so wisely put it, the beginning of wisdom is the beginning of supernatural power. Let us take staff in hand and, starting forth, walk up and down the dusty roads of Hindustan, climbing the high mountains to the north and dipping into the torrid plains of the south, while we study the roadside wonders of this ancient people. Some will ask for proof of these stories and how we know these strange tales to be true. Our answer is simple. Take your staff in hand and join us on the Indian road. Then you too will learn. If you will not do this, and come with open mind to examine all the factors in the case, then pass no harsh opinion, but rather give a truly Islamic shrug and say, anything might happen and anything might be true. A tree that grows alphabets on its leaves. The great monastery of Kunbum in Sifao lies near the western frontier of China. It is a rambling group of buildings in the midst of which rises the somewhat impressive double roof of the temple. Here preserved for the veneration of the faithful is the remarkable Tibetan alphabet tree, sometimes referred to as the tree of the 100,000 images. The tree itself is short and thick through, with low branches in a somewhat shapeless mass. The Abbé Hugh, a Roman Catholic missionary who was struck off the list of missionaries at Rome and had his work on travels in Tibet and China placed on the Roman Index, thus describes the tree of sacred letters. At the foot of the mountain on which the Amazery stands, and not far from the principal Buddhist temple, is a great square enclosure formed by brick walls. Upon entering this, we were able to examine at leisure the marvelous tree, some of the branches of which had already manifested themselves above the wall. Our eyes were first directed with earnest curiosity at the leaves, and we were filled with absolute consternation of astonishment at finding that, in point of fact, there were upon each of the leaves well-formed Tibetan characters, all of a green color, some darker, some lighter than the leaf itself. Our first impression was suspicion of fraud on the part of the lamas, but after a minute examination of every detail, we could not discover the least deception. The characters all appeared to us portions of the leaf itself. Equally with its veins and nerves, the position was not the same in all. In one leaf, they would be at the top of the leaf, in another in the middle, in a third at the base or at the side. The younger leaves represented the characters only in a partial state of formation. The bark of the tree and its branches, which resemble those of the plane tree, are also covered with these characters. When you remove a piece of old bark, the young bark under it exhibits the indistinct outlines of characters in a germinating state, and what is very singular, these new characters are not infrequently different from those which they replace. We examined everything with the closest attention in order to detect some trace of trickery, but we could discern nothing of the sort, and the perspiration absolutely trickled down our faces under the influence of the sensations which this most amazing spectacle created. To this description we will append a few words of commentary by H.P. Blavatsky. We will add to Monsieur Hugh's narrative the statement that the characters which appear upon the different portions of the Kun Bom are in the Sansa, or language of the sun, characters ancient Sanskrit, and that the sacred tree in its various parts contains in extenso the whole history of the creation, and in substance the sacred books of Buddhism. Nor was this the only mystery which Abbe Hugh discovered in far-off Tartary. He found a tiny child, declared to be the reincarnation of Buddha, conversing profoundly on metaphysical issues, and describing in detail things which had occurred to him in a previous life, facts which were known to those gathered about him, but which at his age he could have learned in no ordinary manner. And then Abbe Hugh came in contact with a very unusual painting hanging on the La Mercerie wall. It was simply done upon rough canvas depicting a moonlit scene. Strange as it may seem, the abbé declares that the moon painted on this picture was continually changing its size and appearance to conform with the phases of the moon in the sky. He examined the picture with minute care, but there was no mechanical device of any kind. There was in truth a real moon moving on a canvas background. It is easy to realize how such tales as these, when they reached Rome, proved the undoing of the naive abbé, who was not sufficiently acquainted with Western attitudes to recognize that most men do not want to know facts, but merely desire to have their own prejudices confirmed and maintained at all cost. A yogin who sits in the air, example of levitation as practiced by the wonder workers of India. We will now turn our faces Indiaward to visit an old Mohammedan fakir who lived at Mundla, east of Jubalpur. This learned man practiced an art extremely disconcerting to the followers of Newton. In the presence of many witnesses, this fakir levitated himself and sat in the air about 6 inches from the ground without any support or mechanism whatever. He could remain in this position for about 15 minutes and then sank slowly back to earth. Previous to this exploit, he carried on for about 2 hours a certain process of contraction and expansion of the abdominal and thoracic muscles, and for about half an hour suspended the breath, which latter process is known as kumbhaka. It is not difficult to imagine the consternation which would occur among the savants of this era if, in chancing to walk down the street someday, they should come upon a man sitting in the air. Yet levitation has been practiced in India for thousands of years, and the old man at Mundla in no way represented the highest type of proficiency in the art. Umacharam Mukherjee, who beheld the Jubalpur fakir, also saw a yogi in the Karoka Mandala hills, seated on a wooden plank some distance above the ground. The plank was without any support or rope, but hung as though from the sky near a banyan tree. Louis Jacoliot, Chief Justice of Chandenarque, French East Indies, and of Tahiti, Oceanica, devoted many years to an investigation of the pretensions of Oriental fakir and yogis. After examining all the evidence and being a witness of a great array of phenomena, he arrived at the following conclusions. I am convinced that there are in nature and in man, who is a part of nature, immense forces, the laws of which are yet unknown to us. I think that man someday will discover these laws, that things that we now regard as dreams will appear to us in the future as realities, and that we shall one day witness phenomena of which we have now no conception. In the world of ideas, as in the material world, there is a period of gestation, as of birth. Who knows whether this psychic force, as the English call it, this force of the ego, according to the Hindus, which the humble fakir exhibited in my presence, will not be shown to be one of the grandest forces in nature. Skywalking adepts, the fabled wonder workers from the snowy range. In his amazing book, Occult Science in India, Jacoliot describes a score or more of examples of transcendental magic performed in his presence, and which he analyzed as to the possibility of fraud. 2 of these are concerned with levitation and confirm the evidence of other writers on this subject. The first account is substantially as follows. Taking an ironwood cane, which Jacoliot had brought with him from Ceylon, the fakir, who was without garments save for a meager loincloth, seated himself cross-legged upon the ground and leaned heavily upon the stick, resting his right hand above the handle. After appropriate incantations, and still leaning upon the cane with one hand, the fakir rose gradually about 2 feet from the ground. His legs were crossed beneath him, and he made no change in his position, which was very like that of those bronze statues of Buddha. For more than 20 minutes, Jacoliot examined the fakir, attempting to discover how the man could thus fly in the face and eyes of known laws of gravity. The stick gave the fakir no visible support, and there was no apparent contact between the stick and his body except through his right hand. In another place, Jacoliot describes the feat of levitation without any stick, which was also performed in his own apartments. As the fakir was about to leave me, he stopped in the embrasure of the door leading from the terrace to the outside stairs, and crossing his arms upon his chest, lifted himself up gradually, without any apparent support or assistance, to the height of about 10 to 12 inches. I was able to determine the distance exactly by means of a point of comparison which I had fixed upon during the continuance of the phenomenon. Behind the fakir's back there was a silken hanging, which was used as a portiere, striped in gold and white bands of equal width. I noticed that the fakir's feet were on a level with the sixth band. At the commencement of his ascension, I had seized my chronometer. The entire time, from the moment when the fakir commenced to rise until he touched the ground again, was more than 8 minutes. He remained perfectly still, at the highest point of elevation for nearly 5 minutes. Friar Ridiculed, in referring to the metaphysical powers of the Hindu Bakshis, describes them as persons of deep wisdom, well conducted, and of the gravest morals. For instance, one of eminence among them was said to fly. The truth, however, was, as it proved, that he did not fly, but did walk close to the surface of the ground without touching it, and would seem to sit down without having any substance to support him. The snake charmer always fascinates. Colonel Sir Henry Yule also makes the following comment on this feat. This last performance was witnessed by Ibn Battuta at Delhi in the presence of Sultan Mohammed Tughlaq, and it was professedly exhibited by a Brahmin at Madras in the present century, 1903, a descendant doubtless of those Brahmins whom Apollonius saw walking 2 cubits from the ground. It is also described by the worthy Francis Valentine as a performance known and practiced in his own day in India. It is related, he says, that a man will first go and sit on 3 sticks, put together so as to form a tripod, after which first 1 stick, then a second, then the third shall be removed from under him, and the man shall not fall, but shall remain sitting in the air. Another extraordinary practice of Hindu magicians is that of suspended animation. This must not be confused with Occidental theatrical efforts to duplicate the illusion upon the stage. While a similar effect can be secured by mechanical means, the genuine yogi descends to no such subterfuge. Frank G. Carpenter writes of the Indian holy men, "Others claim that they can remain alive though buried underground for long periods. They declare that they can seal the lungs by putting the tip of the tongue in the windpipe, and then they allow themselves to be interred. Not all these cases appear to be frauds. Reliable witnesses report they have seen the yogis dug up alive after such burials. Some report that the men go into a state of hibernation like that of bears in winter." Devil dancers from Darjeeling. In Isis Unveiled, H.P. Blavatsky thus describes the almost unbelievable details of this amazing exploit. According to Napier, Osborne, Major Laws, Kenouillet, Nikiforovich, and many other modern witnesses, fakirs are now proved to be able, by a long course of diet, preparation, and repose, to bring their bodies into a condition which enables them to be buried 6 feet under the ground for an indefinite period. Sir Claude Wade was present at the court of Runjit Singh when a fakir, mentioned by the Honourable Captain Osborne, was buried alive for 6 weeks in a box placed in a cell 3 feet below the floor of the room. To prevent the chance of deception, a guard comprising 2 companies of soldiers had been detailed, and 4 sentries were furnished and relieved every 2 hours, night and day, to guard the building from intrusion. On opening it, says Sir Claude, we saw the figure enclosed in a bag of white linen fastened by a string over the head. The servant then began pouring warm water over the figure. The legs and arms of the body were shriveled and stiff, the face full, the head reclining on the shoulder like that of a corpse. I then called to the medical gentleman who was attending me to come down and inspect the body, which he did, but could discover no pulsation in the heart, the temples, or the arm. There was, however, a heat about the region of the brain which existed in no other part of the body exhibited. Regretting that the limits of our space forbid the quotations of the details of this interesting story, we will only add that the process of resuscitation included bathing with hot water, friction, the removal of wax and cotton pledgets from the nostrils and ears, the rubbing of the eyelids with ghee or clarified butter, and what will appear most curious to many, the application of a hot wheaten cake about an inch thick to the top of the head. After the cake had been applied for the third time, the body was violently convulsed. The nostrils became inflated, the respiration ensued, and the limbs assumed a natural fullness, but the pulsation was still faintly perceptible. The tongue was then anointed with ghee. The eyeballs became dilated and recovered their natural color, and the fakir recognized those present and spoke. It should be noticed that not only had the nostrils and ears been plugged, but the tongue had been thrust back so as to close the gullet, thus effectually stopping the orifices against the admission of atmospheric air. While in India, a fakir told us that this was done not only to prevent the action of the air upon the organic tissues, but also to guard the deposit of the germs of decay, which in case of suspended animation would cause decomposition exactly as they do in any other meat exposed to air. There are also localities in which a fakir would refuse to be buried, such as the many spots in southern India infested with the white ants, which annoying termites are considered among the most dangerous enemies of man and his property. They are so voracious as to devour anything they find, except perhaps metals. As to wood, there is no kind through which they would not burrow. And even bricks and mortar offer but little impediment to their formidable armies. They will patiently work through mortar, destroying it particle by particle. And a fakir, however holy himself and strong his temporary coffin, would not risk finding his body devoured when it was time for his resuscitation. The boy and the basket trick. No description of Oriental conjury would be complete without that of the famous boy in the basket or basket murder trick. While in the majority of cases this may be regarded as representing the conjurer's skill at deception, still examples are recorded of such astonishing import as to imply that on rare occasions it assumes the proportions of sorcery. The equipment for the exhibition consists of a large basket, somewhat square and with a circular opening in the top, a cover containing a round hole which fits closely over the opening in the basket, a pointed stake which passes through the hole in the cover, a square of canvas or native cloth, a long sharp sword, and a scantily clothed native boy, generally about 14 years old. In the particular instance, which came under our observation, a net was added to the general equipment. The trick is performed on the open ground, with the audience completely encircling the conjurer. This worthy first seats himself cross-legged upon the ground and plays several notes upon a strange flute-like instrument. After a few moments, the native boy appears, generally clothed only in a loincloth. The lad was securely tied up in a net which was apparently drawn so tightly about him that he could not move in any direction, and then was forced into the basket, which was barely large enough to contain his body. In fact, his head and shoulders extended considerably above the top of the opening. The magician then spread the cloth over the basket. The cloth did not reach entirely to the ground, but hung over the rounded sides of the basket. The lid was next placed in position, but would not entirely go down because of the protruding head and shoulders of the boy, which could be seen through the folds of the cloth. Leaving the basket sitting in the midst of the audience, the conjurer again seated himself, playing a weird and pathetic melody upon his flute. After a few seconds, the lid of the basket slowly dropped into position. Allowing a short interval to pass, the magician then rose and, going over to the basket, inserted the stake in the opening in the lid and with a quick move drove it straight through to the bottom of the basket. The boy had apparently vanished. Withdrawing the stake, the juggler then took his sword and thrust it through all parts of the basket, and taking off the lid, he jumped into the basket and, stamping around, demonstrated its emptiness. Finally, he reached under the cloth and drew forth the net which had enclosed the boy. After a few moments, he replaced the net, returned the cover to its proper position, and sitting down again played upon his flute. As soon as the first note was struck, the basket began to heave and move, and the lid rose again. Upon removing the cover and canvas, the boy was again found tied up in the net, and it required the assistance of 2 other men to extricate him from the basket. Miraculous mango trees. Of almost equal interest is the famous Oriental illusion of the mango trees, an experiment in what may be termed intensive horticulture. There is scarcely a country in the world where the story of this trick has not been told, yet, strange to say, the intimate details of it are seldom described. The preparation for the trick consists in securing 3 sticks about 4 feet in length and of the thickness of canes, which are arranged in the form of the poles of an American Indian teepee. This framework is covered with a large white cloth, the whole constituting a small tent. One side of this covering opens to permit the spectators to watch what is going on inside. The conjurer next produces a large oblong mango seed, which he passes around for examination, afterwards requesting one of the audience to carve his initials into the pod. This having been done, the magician next produces an empty flower pot, which he fills with earth and in which he plants the seed. He then thoroughly waters the tree with a sprinkling can and, placing the flower pot with its contents inside the teepee-like tent, drops the flap, sits down nearby and plays upon the inevitable flute. After about 5 minutes, he rises, lifts the side of the tent, and there, protruding from the earth in the flower pot, is a tiny green shoot. Closing the flap again, he continues to play. After another interval, he once more lifts the flap and a mango bush about 1 foot in height is seen, growing out of the pot. Some 3 minutes later, when the tent is again opened, the mango bush has reached full growth and is in bloom. More playing of strange tunes upon the reed. Then the tent is removed entirely and the mango tree is revealed covered with ripe mangoes, which are picked off and tossed into the audience. Then with a sudden gesture, the magician tears up the plant and, shaking off the dirt, shows the open pod still clinging to the roots and bearing the initials inscribed thereon at the beginning of the experiment. The entire growth of the tree requires not to exceed 15 minutes. Even more astonishing accounts of the miraculous growth of plants and trees have been described by Asiatic travelers. One fakir is said to have grown a full-sized palm tree in less than 30 minutes. And there is an account of a juggler having planted the seed so close to the edge of the porch that when the tree grew up, it took off one corner of the veranda. Govindasamy, who performed the mango tree illusion for Monsieur Jacques Collier, evidently used no conjury in the production of the growing tree. He permitted the Frenchman to choose from over 30 types of plants the one which he would care to have grown. The fakir required 2 hours to grow a young papaw 8 inches in height. Govindasamy further explained that it would take him 8 days to grow the papaw to the point of flowering and 7 more to perfect the fruit. Such feats challenge belief, but it is equally difficult to doubt the statements of honorable men, by nature skeptical, who have been converted by evident fact. While in India, H.P. Blavatsky was chosen as the referee at a trial of skill between a holy fakir and a sorcerer, each of whom claimed to be the possessor of superior spiritual powers. She writes, "We were taking our noonday rest beside a small lake in northern India. Upon the surface of the glassy water floated innumerable aquatic flowers and large shining leaves. Each of the contestants plucked a leaf. The fakir, laying his against his breast, folded his hands across it and fell into a momentary trance. He then laid the leaf with its surface downward upon the water. The juggler pretended to control the watermaster, the spirit dwelling in the water, and boasted that he would compel the power to prevent the pitris from manifesting any phenomena upon the fakir's leaf in their element. He took his own leaf and tossed it upon the water after going through a form of barbarous incantation. It at once exhibited a violent agitation, while the other leaf remained perfectly motionless. After the lapse of a few seconds, both leaves were recovered. Upon that of the fakir were found, much to the indignation of the juggler, something that looked like a symmetrical design traced in milk-white characters, as though the juices of the plant had been used as a corrosive writing fluid. When it became dry and an opportunity was afforded to examine the lines with care, it proved to be a series of exquisitely formed Sanskrit characters, the whole composed a sentence embodying a high moral precept. The fakir, let us add, could neither read nor write. Upon the juggler's leaf, instead of writing, was found the tracing of a most hideous impish face. Each leaf, therefore, bore an impression or allegorical reflection of the character of the contestant, and indicated the quality of spiritual beings with which he was surrounded. Madame Blavatsky's position as a world traveler and student of Oriental religions and philosophies is so well established that we cannot turn from her writings without noting one more example of Oriental fakirism. The story is concerned with the depredations of a Bengal tigress, which had thrown the whole population of a small village not far from Dhaka into a panic. 2 men and a child had already become her victims when an aged fakir bent on his daily round, emerging from the gate of the pagoda, saw the situation and understood it at a glance. Chanting a mantra, he went straight to the beast, which with flaming eye and foaming mouth crouched near a tree ready for a new victim. When at about 10 feet from the tigress, without interrupting his modulated prayer, the words of which no layman comprehends, he began a regular process of mesmerization as we understood it. He made passes. A terrific howl which struck chill into the heart of every human being in the place was then heard. This long, ferocious, drawling howl gradually subsided into a series of plaintive, broken sobs, as if the bereaved mother was uttering her complaints. And then, to the terror of the crowd which had taken refuge on trees and in the houses, the beast made a tremendous leap on the holy man, as they thought. They were mistaken. She was at his feet, rolling in the dust and writhing. A few moments more and she remained motionless, with her enormous head laid on her forepaws and her bloodshot but now mild eyes riveted on the face of the fakir. Then the holy man of prayer sat beside the tigress and tenderly smoothed her striped skin and patted her back, until her groans became fainter and fainter, and half an hour later, all the village was standing around this group. The fakir's head lying on the tigress's back as a pillow, his right hand on her head, and his left thrown on the sod under the terrible mouth, from which the long, red, protruding tongue was gently licking it. Enter the magician. The feats of the fakirs and yogis are too numerous to describe in anything like adequate detail. Through their peculiar training, they are brought en rapport with forces or beings who bestow upon them the most unbelievable gifts. In Tibet, there is a college for the education of magicians. And throughout Asia, the occult arts are cultivated as more or less essential to the fulfillment of the requisites of a spiritual life. We have saved the most miraculous exploit for the last. For of all Oriental conjury, the mystery of the boy who climbs up into the air along a rope suspended from nothing, finally to vanish altogether, is the most inexplicable. Because it is so rarely performed, many persons believe this trick to be a myth. In his notes upon the book of Sir Marco Polo, which work he translated from the French and copiously annotated, Colonel Sir Henry Yule, R.S.C.B., KCSI, already mentioned, gathers several fragments of evidence relative to this supreme demonstration of sorcery. As most persons seeking information on this subject would not be likely to turn to Marco Polo, although this great traveler makes numerous references to such matters, we feel it advisable to quote somewhat freely from the commentaries of Colonel Yule. Ibn Battuta, a Moor visiting China in the year 1348, was present at an entertainment given at the court of the Viceroy of Kansa, where he beheld a miracle which is best described in his own words. That same night, a juggler who was one of the Khan's slaves made his appearance, and the Emir said to him, "Come and show us some of your marvels." Upon this, he took a wooden ball with several holes in it, through which long thongs were passed, and laying hold of one of these, slung it into the air. It went so high that we lost sight of it altogether. It was the hottest season of the year, and we were outside in the middle of the palace court. There now remained only a little of the end of the thong in the conjurer's hand, and he desired one of the boys who assisted him to lay hold of it and mount. He did so, climbing by the thong, and we lost sight of him also. The conjurer then called to him 3 times, but getting no answer, he snatched up a knife as if in great rage, laid hold of the thong, and disappeared also. By and by he threw down one of the boy's hands, then a foot, then the other hand, and then the other foot, then the trunk, and last of all the head. Then he came down himself, all puffing and panting, and with his clothes all bloody, kissed the ground before the Emir, and said something to him in Chinese. The Emir gave some orders in reply, and our friend then took the lad's limbs, laid them together in their places, and gave a kick, when presto, there was the boy, who got up and stood before us. All this astonished me beyond measure, and I had an attack of palpitation like that which overcame me once before in the presence of the Sultan of India, when he showed me something of the same kind. They gave me a cordial, however, which cured the attack. The Qazi Afkaruddin, was next to me, and quoth he, "Walla, 'tis my opinion there has been neither going up nor coming down, neither marring nor mending, 'tis all hocus pocus." Edward Melton, an Anglo-Dutch traveller, witnessed a similar performance in Batavia about the year 1670. He writes, "But now I am going to relate a thing which surpasses all belief, and which I should scarcely venture to insert here had it not been witnessed by thousands before mine own eyes. One of the same gang, troop of conjurers, took a ball of cord and, grasping one end of the cord in his hand, slung the other up into the air with such force that its extremity was beyond the reach of our sight. He then immediately climbed up the cord with indescribable swiftness and got so high we could no longer see him. Melton then describes the arms and legs tumbling down and later uniting themselves, and the magician rising uninjured. He goes so far as to say, after beholding this wonder, that he no longer doubted but that the men performed the trick by the aid of the devil." The Emperor Jahangir relates a like performance given before him by a troop of Bengal jugglers. He writes, "They produced a chain of 50 cubits in length, and in my presence threw one end of it towards the sky, where it remained as if fastened to something in the air. A dog was then brought forward, and being placed at the lower end of the chain, immediately ran up the chain, and reaching the other end, immediately disappeared in the air. In the same manner, a hog, a panther, a lion, and a tiger were successively sent up the chain, and all equally disappeared at the upper end of the chain. At last they took down the chain and put it into a bag, no one ever discovering in what way the different animals were made to vanish into the air in the mysterious manner above described." The last account, given by Colonel Yule, is quoted from the Weekly Dispatch for the 15th of September, 1889, quoting the Times of India. One Siddheshwar Mitter, writing to the Calcutta paper, gives a thrilling account of a conjurer's feat, which he witnessed recently in one of the villages of the Hooghly district. He saw the whole thing himself, he tells us, so there need be no question about the facts. On the particular afternoon when he visited the village, the place was occupied by a company of male and female jugglers, armed with bags and boxes and musical instruments, and all the mysterious paraphernalia of the peripatetic Jadugar. While Siddheshwar was looking on, and in the broad, clear light of the afternoon, a man was shut up in a box, which was then carefully nailed up and bound with cords. Weird spells and incantations of the style we are all familiar with were followed by the breaking open of the box, which, to the unqualified amazement of everybody, was found to be perfectly empty. All this is much in the usual style, but what followed was so much superior to the ordinary run of modern Indian jugglery that we must give it in the simple Siddheshwar's own words. When everyone was satisfied that the man had really disappeared, the principal performer, who did not seem to be at all astonished, told his audience that the vanished man had gone up to the heavens to fight Indra. In a few moments, says Siddheshwar, he expressed anxiety at the man's continued absence in the aerial regions and said that he would go up to see what was the matter. A boy was called who held upright a long bamboo up which the man climbed to the top, whereupon we suddenly lost sight of him, and the boy laid the bamboo on the ground. Then there fell on the ground before us the different members of a human body, all bloody, first one hand, then another, a foot, and so on, until complete. The boy then elevated the bamboo, and the principal performer, appearing on the top as suddenly as he had disappeared, came down and, seeming quite disconsolate, said that Indra had killed his friend before he could get there to save him. He then placed the mangled remains in the same box, closed it, and tied it as before. Our wonder and astonishment reached their climax when a few minutes later, on the box being again opened, the man jumped out perfectly hearty and unhurt. Many explanations have been advanced to account for the miracle of the rope trick. Some declare that the trick is performed under a tree, in the branches of which a confederate is hidden, who under cover of the darkness of night catches the rope and holds it while the boy climbs up on the branches and apparently disappears. Some believe the rope to be a trick, in other words, to be braided over bamboo joints, which can be formed into a rigid pole by pulling on a cord concealed within. This pole, which would carry the weight of a monkey, it is generally admitted, however, could not sustain the weight of even a small child. If the trick be performed in daylight in an open place, where mirrors and similar devices are out of the question, there is no possible explanation for it to be found in the secrets of Occidental conjury. Efforts have been made, it is said, to photograph the trick, But the plates always come out blank, which has led to the conclusion that the whole miracle is simply an hallucination, a spell cast by the hypnotic power of the conjurer. This explanation, however, is not adequate. For a man capable of hypnotizing en masse a large audience would be a greater wonder than the trick itself. For as is well known, many persons cannot be hypnotized, and in every audience there would be some who would complain that they could not see the trick. Two forces conspire in the production of these illusions. The first is the willpower of the conjurer himself. This is not used to hypnotize the audience, but to cause appearances or forms to be materialized from the subtle forces of the ether. The magician thinks so intensely that he can cause his thoughts to take on form and appear as real objects to the uninitiated. The second factor is the elemental spirits. They are called pitris and are presumably attached to the persons of enchanters of all kinds. These elemental beings are responsible for the motion of otherwise inanimate objects, the moving of articles from one place to another. They hold the rope in the rope trick, and like the familiar demon of Faust, are ever ready to serve the purposes of their master. The Hindus themselves know that the wonderful feats ascribed to the yogis and fakirs are referable to their ability to control what we call the forces of nature. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.